Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get started. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much. Now, let's get started. It's been a few days since Ethan and Sophia signed the agreement, and things are starting to get complicated. At first, everything seemed simple. They would attend a few events, take a couple of photos together, and the public would believe in their relationship. Ethan, ever the strategist, saw it as nothing more than a temporary business deal. He had a reputation to protect, and Sophia's plan seemed like the perfect solution. But now, as they prepare for their first public appearance as a couple, things are beginning to feel less like a professional arrangement and more like something else entirely. Ethan, as usual, was early to the event. He always arrived on time, but today, there was something different. He stood in front of the mirror in his hotel room, adjusting his tie for the 5th time. This was the first time he'd be seen in public with a woman, and for some reason, it felt like more than just a show. He had spent the past few years building his empire, billion-dollar deals, massive projects, global recognition, but none of that seemed to matter right now. All he could focus on was how his picture with Sophia would look. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare moment of insecurity. It wasn't like him. Ethan Blackwood didn't get nervous. But today was different. It was business, but it was also personal. When he heard a knock at the door, he snapped out of his thoughts. He straightened his jacket and opened the door to find Sophia standing in the hallway, looking more stunning than he had anticipated. She wore a sleek black dress that complemented her figure, and her hair was styled perfectly, professional, yet effortlessly elegant. She smiled when she saw him, a smile that, for a brief second, made Ethan feel a strange sensation in his chest. "Ready to go?" she asked, her voice light and confident, but there was something in her eyes that Ethan couldn't quite place. "You look great," Ethan said, surprising himself with the compliment. He wasn't one for small talk, but something about her presence made him feel off balance. Sophia tilted her head slightly, studying him for a moment, before offering a smile in return. "Thanks. You clean up well, too," she teased, though there was no hint of sarcasm in her voice. Ethan tried to mask his discomfort with a smirk of his own. "Let's get this over with," he said, though inside, a small voice was telling him that maybe this fake relationship wasn't going to be as simple as he had first thought. The drive to the event was quiet, with only the hum of the car's engine filling the space between them. They arrived at the venue, and as soon as they stepped out of the car, the flashing lights of the paparazzi cameras went off. The crowd outside the gala was eager to see the newest power couple in town. Ethan's grip on Sophia's hand tightened slightly, a small gesture that didn't go unnoticed by her. It wasn't a romantic gesture, at least, not in his mind, but it was a signal, a way to reassure her that this was real, even if only for the cameras. As they walked down the red carpet, cameras flashing around them, Ethan felt the weight of the public's gaze pressing down on him. He was used to being watched, he had been a public figure for years, but this was different. With Sophia by his side, the attention felt more intense. He wasn't sure why, but there was a strange mix of relief and anxiety building inside him. For Sophia, the experience was both exhilarating and surreal. She had attended events before, but nothing like this. The glitz, the glamour, the flashing lights, it all felt overwhelming. But she knew how to handle herself. She had been in the spotlight before, albeit in a different context, and knew how to smile through the discomfort. Just act natural, she told herself under her breath as she flashed a smile for the cameras. But as the night wore on, she couldn't help but notice how much she was starting to care about what Ethan thought of her. Was it just because they were working together? Or was there something more to this? She pushed the thought aside. She was here for the story. She had a job to do, and she couldn't afford to let her emotions get in the way. Ethan, on the other hand, kept his emotions in check, at least, that's what he told himself. But when they finally found their way to a quiet corner of the venue, away from the flashing cameras and the crowd, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this arrangement than just business. His attraction to Sophia was undeniable, even if he refused to acknowledge it. But that didn't mean he was ready to deal with it. For now, it was easier to focus on the task at hand. This isn't real, he reminded himself. It's just a contract. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple anymore. As the days went by, Ethan and Sophia's public appearances became more frequent. They attended charity galas, high-profile events, and even a few intimate gatherings, each time playing their roles to perfection. On the surface, everything seemed to be going according to plan. The media ate up the idea of the new power couple, and Ethan's image started to improve. But behind the scenes, things were not as smooth as they appeared. Ethan, despite his best efforts, found himself thinking about Sophia more than he should. He told himself it was just the contract, nothing more, but every time he saw her smile, or when their eyes met in a crowded room, he felt a stirring in his chest that he could not explain. He had never been one to let his emotions get in the way of business, yet here he was, struggling to keep his distance from her. Sophia, on the other hand, was starting to feel the pressure of the fake relationship. She was supposed to be doing this for her career, for the story, but she couldn't help but notice how Ethan's presence affected her. At first, she had seen him as just another high-profile businessman, cold, distant, and a little intimidating. But now, she was starting to see a different side of him. When they were alone, he was less guarded, more relaxed. He wasn't the ice-cold billionaire the media portrayed him to be. But what surprised her most was how much she began to care about him. She told herself it was part of the job, she had to get close to him, after all, to write her story. But that didn't explain the way her heart would race when he said her name, or how she found herself looking for his approval more often than she expected. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. They had agreed to keep things professional, but the lines were blurring, and both of them knew it. One evening, after yet another charity event, they were in the car on the way back to the hotel. The ride was quiet, the weight of their unspoken thoughts hanging in the air. Sophia glanced at Ethan, who was staring out of the window, his expression unreadable. She opened her mouth to say something but hesitated. The tension between them had become palpable, and she didn't want to make it worse. But then, almost as if reading her mind, Ethan spoke. "This is getting complicated, isn't it?" His voice was low, almost hesitant. Sophia looked at him, surprised by his admission. "What do you mean?" she asked, though she had a pretty good idea. Ethan turned his head slightly, meeting her gaze for the first time that night. "I thought I could handle this," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "It was supposed to be simple. A contract. A deal. But it's not that simple anymore." Sophia's heart skipped a beat at his words. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. She had been feeling the same way, torn between her professional duty and her growing feelings for him. "I know what you mean," she said softly. "I thought it was just a job, too." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But now, I'm not sure." Ethan didn't say anything for a moment, his gaze back out the window. The silence between them stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if they both knew that something had shifted, but neither was ready to face it. They arrived at the hotel, and as Ethan got out of the car, he offered her a brief glance. "Good night, Sophia." "Good night," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Neither of them could sleep. Ethan lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, his mind racing. He wasn't sure when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, his feelings for Sophia had gone from professional respect to something deeper, something he wasn't ready to admit. He had always been in control of his business, his life, but now, it felt like something was slipping out of his grasp. On the other side of the hotel, Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, her thoughts in turmoil. She had come here to get a story, to build her career, but now she was questioning everything. Was she falling for Ethan? Was he falling for her? And if they were, what did that mean for the contract? What did it mean for their futures? The next morning, the awkwardness between them was impossible to ignore. At breakfast, neither of them spoke much, both lost in their own thoughts. They had crossed a line, but neither knew how to go back. The truth was, they were both in deep, and they both knew it. And neither one of them was ready to confront what that meant just yet. The tension between Ethan and Sophia was palpable, and neither one of them knew how to deal with it. After that quiet ride back to the hotel, things hadn't been the same. They still carried on with their public appearances, still played their roles, but the cracks in their carefully constructed fake relationship were beginning to show. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Sophia. He told himself it was just the contract, that he was only doing this for his company's image, but every time she laughed, or when their hands brushed against each other, he felt something stir inside him. Something he hadn't felt in years. The last time he'd allowed himself to feel anything, it had ended badly, and he wasn't about to make that mistake again. But Sophia was different, he told himself. She was smart, driven, and she didn't seem to care about his wealth or power. But that only made it worse. It made him want to know more about her, to break down the walls she had built up. He had never felt this drawn to someone before, and it scared him. On the other hand, Sophia was struggling with her own emotions. This had started as a simple career move, an assignment to write a story, a way to get ahead. But somewhere along the way, things had gotten complicated. Ethan was no longer just the billionaire she was pretending to be in a relationship with. He was someone she found herself wanting to be with. Every time they shared a moment, even the smallest one, it felt more real. And that was the problem. She couldn't let herself fall for him. This was a job, nothing more. But it was hard to ignore the way he looked at her sometimes, the way he made her feel like she was the only person in the room. And as much as she tried to push those feelings away, they lingered. She had been trying to keep her emotions in check, but it was becoming harder every day. It was on another one of their public outings that things began to shift. They were attending a corporate event, an important one for Ethan's company, and as usual, they had to play the part. The cameras were flashing, people were watching, and they were smiling, posing as the perfect couple. But something happened that neither of them had expected. As they walked through the crowd, a reporter approached them, eager to get a comment about their relationship. Ethan, ever the businessman, knew how to handle the press. But this time, when the reporter turned to Sophia and asked her a personal question about her feelings for Ethan, something in the air shifted. Sophia hesitated, her heart racing. The question had come out of nowhere, and for a split second, she was caught off guard. She glanced at Ethan, unsure of what to say. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, it was clear that they were no longer just playing a part. There was something deeper between them now, something that neither of them had expected or prepared for. I care about him, Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the truth, but it felt like an admission of something they had both been avoiding. The reporter smiled, sensing the change in the air. That's wonderful to hear. It's obvious you two have something special. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. He wasn't sure how he felt about Sophia's admission, but it was clear that things had changed. As the event continued, he found himself more and more distracted. His thoughts kept drifting back to that moment, to the way Sophia had looked at him when she spoke. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a line. Later that evening, when they were alone in the hotel room, the tension between them was impossible to ignore. Ethan paced the room, running a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of everything. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, her thoughts a whirl of confusion. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Why did you say that?" he asked, his voice low and guarded. Sophia looked up at him, her heart pounding. "It was the truth," she said quietly. "And I think you know that, too." Ethan froze, his eyes locking with hers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, and neither knew how to break the silence. But eventually, Ethan took a deep breath and walked toward her. He didn't know what he was doing, but for the first time in weeks, he couldn't push the feeling away anymore. He sat down beside her on the bed, and for the first time, he didn't try to control the distance between them. He let the silence linger for a moment longer before finally speaking. "I didn't expect this," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I didn't expect to feel this way." Sophia didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure what to say, or if saying anything at all would make things worse. But after a long pause, she spoke softly. "Neither did I." They sat in silence again, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if they had both finally acknowledged what had been building between them, something real. And as much as they both tried to fight it, they knew that things could never go back to the way they were before. The days after the event felt like a blur. Ethan and Sophia still had to maintain the public image they had so carefully crafted, but the tension between them was undeniable. Every time their hands brushed, or their eyes met in passing, it was harder to pretend that nothing had changed. The walls they had built between their professional selves and the emotions they were beginning to feel for each other were starting to crumble, piece by piece. Ethan was struggling more than he wanted to admit. He had always been in control, both in business and in his personal life, but now, for the first time, he found himself unable to control the way he felt. He had never expected to care about Sophia this much. She had always been just a reporter to him, someone he needed for the image of his company, but now, he found himself wanting to know more about her. Her smile, her laugh, the way she looked at him with those thoughtful eyes, it all started to get under his skin. And the worst part was, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Sophia, on the other hand, was doing everything she could to keep her emotions in check. She had a job to do. This was supposed to be a professional arrangement, nothing more, nothing less. But the more time she spent with Ethan, the more complicated everything became. She found herself wondering what it would be like if they didn't have to pretend. What if they were just two people, not bound by a contract or an image to uphold? It was a dangerous thought, and she quickly pushed it aside. But the thought lingered, and with every passing day, it became harder to ignore. As they continued their public appearances, the cracks in their facade grew more apparent. People began to notice the small changes, the way Ethan would look at Sophia when he thought no one was watching, the way they would share private smiles between them, moments that seemed too real for a fake relationship. The media started to speculate, and the rumors began to swirl. Some were convinced that Ethan and Sophia were truly in love, while others believed they were simply putting on a show for the cameras. But the truth was somewhere in between. They were both playing a part, but they were also starting to feel something real, something neither of them knew how to handle. It was at another gala, just a week after the tension between them had first exploded, that everything came to a head. The event was grander than most, with flashing cameras, a sea of elegantly dressed guests, and a buzz of excitement in the air. Ethan and Sophia arrived together, as usual, their arms linked for the cameras. But this time, something was different. As they walked down the red carpet, Ethan felt a wave of emotion rush over him, something he hadn't expected. He looked at Sophia, and for the first time, he wasn't just seeing her as a business partner or a reporter. He was seeing her as someone he truly cared about. It was a sobering realization. They reached the front of the crowd, and the usual questions from the press began. Reporters shouted their names, trying to get their attention, to ask about the supposed relationship. But this time, when the questions came, it wasn't just about the public image. One reporter, a younger woman who had been covering them for weeks, looked directly at Sophia. "How do you feel about the future with Ethan?" she asked. The question was simple enough, but it hung in the air, pregnant with implications. Sophia glanced at Ethan, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been asked similar questions before, but this time, something felt different. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, the intensity of it. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Then, she found herself answering, her voice soft but clear. "I'm not sure about the future," she said honestly, her eyes never leaving Ethan's. "But I know that right now, it feels real." Ethan's heart skipped a beat at her words. He wasn't prepared for that. The truth of what she had said settled over him like a weight, and for the first time, he realized that he had allowed himself to hope for something more. He had told himself it was just business, that he could keep his emotions out of it. But hearing her say that, it changed everything. The reporter smiled, sensing the shift in the air. "That's a beautiful answer," she said, writing furiously in her notebook. But for Ethan and Sophia, the moment had become much more than an answer for the press. The air between them felt charged, as if they were standing on the edge of something they couldn't yet name. As the event continued, they tried to focus on their roles, but both of them were distracted, lost in their own thoughts. The night ended, and as they left the gala, they were silent. The car ride back to the hotel was filled with an uneasy quiet, neither of them knowing what to say or how to address the unspoken tension between them. When they arrived at the hotel, Ethan got out first, but before he could walk away, he turned to Sophia. "We need to talk," he said, his voice more serious than she had ever heard it. Sophia nodded, her stomach turning with anticipation. She didn't know what was coming, but she knew it was time for the truth to come out. Inside the hotel room, the air was thick with anticipation. Ethan stood by the window, looking out over the city. He wasn't sure how to begin, but he knew he had to say something. Finally, he turned to face her. "Sophia," he began, his voice low, "I don't know what's happening between us, but I can't ignore it anymore." Sophia's heart raced. This was the moment. The moment everything changed. The silence between them was deafening. Ethan stood by the window, his back to Sophia, as he struggled to find the right words. Sophia stood across the room, her heart pounding in her chest, waiting for him to speak. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. She had known this conversation was coming, but she hadn't been prepared for how much it would shake her. "Sophia," Ethan's voice broke the silence, low and serious. "I don't know what's happening between us, but I can't ignore it anymore." Sophia felt her breath catch in her throat. She had never seen Ethan like this before. He was always the confident, controlled billionaire, the man who made decisions with precision, never showing vulnerability. But now, as he stood there, his eyes locked with hers, she saw something she hadn't expected, uncertainty. And it scared her. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stepped forward, slowly, as if drawn to him against her will. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what this is either, but I can't deny that things have changed. I've changed." She paused, looking down for a moment before meeting his gaze again. "I started this for a story, for my career. But now, I don't know." Ethan turned to face her fully, his expression intense. His eyes searched hers, trying to gauge if she felt the same way he did. "I never wanted to let anyone in," he confessed, his voice raw. "I've spent my whole life building this empire, keeping everything under control. But with you, it's different. I don't know how to handle it." The vulnerability in his voice made Sophia's heart ache. She had always seen Ethan as a man who had everything, someone who didn't need anyone. But now, standing before her, he seemed just as lost as she felt. "I don't know how to handle it either," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I can't pretend anymore. Not when I feel like this." The words hung between them, heavy with the unspoken emotions they had both been avoiding. Ethan took a step closer to her, his hand reaching out as if drawn by an invisible force. For a moment, neither of them moved, as if they were both waiting for the other to make the first move. Finally, Ethan closed the distance between them. His hand found hers, and he pulled her gently towards him. The air between them was charged with a new energy, something neither of them had anticipated. "I never expected this," Ethan said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But I can't fight it anymore. I want this. I want you." The words were out before he could stop them, and when he saw the look in her eyes, he knew he had said the right thing. Sophia didn't know what to say. She had come here with a job to do, but now, everything had changed. She had been falling for him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to admit it. "I want you to," she said, her voice soft but sure. Ethan's heart raced as he leaned in, his lips brushing against hers. The kiss was tentative at first, as if neither of them was sure what the next step would be. But soon, the uncertainty melted away, replaced by a growing intensity. The kiss deepened, a silent admission of everything they had been trying to deny. When they finally pulled away, they were both breathless, their faces inches apart. "What does this mean?" Sophia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan looked at her, his thumb brushing over her cheek, and for the first time, he allowed himself to be vulnerable. "It means we can't go back," he said softly. "It means we have to figure this out together." The weight of his words settled over them, and for the first time, they both realized that the contract that had brought them together was no longer the most important thing in their lives. They were no longer just playing a part. What had started as a fake relationship had turned into something real, something they both knew they couldn't ignore. As the night wore on, they stayed close, not speaking much, but their connection growing stronger with each passing minute. There was still so much they had to figure out, so many questions that remained unanswered. But for the first time, they both knew one thing for certain: whatever happened next, they were in this together. The days following that night were a whirlwind. Ethan and Sophia both tried to return to their usual routine, but nothing felt the same. Their relationship, once a well-constructed arrangement for the sake of business, had transformed into something much more complicated. There was no going back. They couldn't deny the growing connection between them, the bond that had started as a contract but had evolved into something real. They were still attending events together, still playing the part of the perfect couple for the media, but now, when the cameras were off, the air between them was charged with something neither of them had expected: desire. Ethan, who had always been the master of control, found himself completely out of his depth. He couldn't focus on anything else. The meetings, the business calls, the deals he used to be able to navigate with ease, all of it seemed secondary to the constant pull he felt towards Sophia. He couldn't stop thinking about her. He found himself wondering what it would be like if they didn't have to pretend anymore. What would happen if they could be honest, if they could just let themselves be together without the weight of expectations or the need for secrecy? He knew what he wanted, but he wasn't sure how to make it happen without risking everything: his business, his reputation, and most of all, his heart. For Sophia, it was no different. She had always been focused on her career, on building a name for herself, but now, everything felt uncertain. She had started this fake relationship with a clear goal in mind, to get ahead in her field, but she hadn't anticipated how easily she would become entangled in her own feelings. The way Ethan looked at her, the way he made her feel safe and seen, it wasn't something she had ever expected. And now, she couldn't ignore it. But she couldn't forget why she was here either. The story, the career advancement, it had all seemed so clear from the start. But now, those goals felt insignificant next to the growing emotions she was experiencing for Ethan. Could she really continue this relationship, knowing that her feelings were real? Could she risk her heart when she wasn't sure where this would go? The more time they spent together, the more the lines between what was fake and what was real blurred. One evening, after another round of public appearances, they found themselves in Ethan's penthouse, alone, away from the prying eyes of the world. The city lights outside cast a soft glow on the room, and for the first time in days, the weight of their unspoken words felt overwhelming. "We need to talk," Ethan said, breaking the silence. His voice was serious, and Sophia could hear the uncertainty in it. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready. She nodded, her heart racing. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Ethan turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "About us. About what we're doing." He paused for a moment, as if collecting his thoughts. "I never thought I would be in this situation. I thought this was just about the contract, about improving my image. But I've realized something, this isn't just business anymore." Sophia felt a lump form in her throat. She knew exactly what he was going to say. He had been distancing himself for the past few days, as if trying to keep everything under control. But now, it was all out in the open. "I've been trying to ignore it," Ethan continued, his voice low. "Trying to keep my distance, but I can't. Not anymore." He took a deep breath, then added, "Sophia, I want you. I want this, whatever this is between us." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sophia felt her chest tighten, her mind racing. She had known this was coming, but hearing him say it out loud made it real. "Ethan," she whispered, "I want you too. But I don't know what this means. I don't know what we're doing." There was a long pause, the silence stretching between them like a thin, fragile thread. Neither of them knew what the future held. All they knew was that they couldn't deny how they felt anymore. "I don't have all the answers," Ethan admitted, "but I know that I don't want to walk away from this. I don't want to lose you." Sophia's heart fluttered in her chest, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like she was finally being honest with herself. She didn't have all the answers either, but she knew that she couldn't ignore what was in front of her. She couldn't ignore the feelings that had been growing between them. "Neither do I," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Slowly, they closed the distance between them. Ethan reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle but firm. For a moment, they just stood there, looking at each other, knowing that whatever happened next, things had changed for good. And as they kissed, the world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, tangled in the emotions they had both been trying so hard to avoid. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, decisions, and uncertainty. Ethan and Sophia had crossed a line that neither of them had expected to cross, and now there was no going back. They were no longer just playing a part for the public, no longer just fulfilling the terms of a contract. What had started as a business arrangement had evolved into something much deeper. But neither of them knew what that meant for the future. They continued to see each other, their public appearances still carefully planned, their smiles still rehearsed for the cameras. But behind the scenes, things were different. When they were alone, the tension between them was palpable, the air charged with unspoken words and emotions neither of them wanted to confront. Ethan found himself torn between what he knew was expected of him and what he wanted. He had built his empire from the ground up, a man known for his control, his precision, his ability to navigate the world of business without letting anything, or anyone, get too close. But now, he was faced with a reality he had never anticipated. He cared about Sophia deeply, and it terrified him. She wasn't just another woman he could keep at arm's length. She wasn't a temporary distraction or a pawn in some game. She was real, and she made him feel things he didn't know how to handle. Sophia, on the other hand, was struggling with her own feelings. She had started this for the story, for her career, but somewhere along the way, she had fallen for Ethan. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. She had always prided herself on keeping her emotions in check, on maintaining control over every situation. But with Ethan, nothing felt controlled. He made her question everything she thought she knew about herself, about her career, about what was important in life. The truth was, she wasn't sure she could keep pretending anymore. She wasn't sure if she could keep living in this in-between space, where everything felt real but nothing could be. The tipping point came one night, as they sat together in Ethan's penthouse, the city lights twinkling outside. It had been a long day, filled with interviews, appearances, and more of the same routine. But this night was different. The air between them was thick with the unsaid. They were both quiet, lost in their thoughts, until Ethan broke the silence. "We can't keep doing this," he said, his voice low but firm. Sophia looked at him, her heart pounding. "What do you mean?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We can't keep pretending like we don't feel anything. It's not fair to either of us." His eyes met hers, and for the first time, he didn't look like the confident businessman, the man who always had a plan. He looked vulnerable. And it was a side of him that caught Sophia off guard. "I know," she said softly. "I don't want to pretend anymore either. But I don't know what comes next." Ethan stood up, pacing for a moment as if trying to work through his own thoughts. "I'm not sure either," he admitted. "But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending I don't want more from this." Sophia stood up as well, moving toward him. "And what if I want more too?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stopped in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Do you?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Sophia nodded, her chest tightening with the truth she had been holding back. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger now. "I want more. I want you. But I don't know what that means for us, for our lives." The uncertainty was still there, but it didn't feel as heavy as it had before. For the first time, they were both being honest with each other. The world outside may have still expected them to maintain their public image, to stick to the narrative they had created, but inside this room, they had made a new one. One that was real, and one that was theirs alone. Ethan took a step toward her, his hand reaching out. "We'll figure it out. Together." And with that, the final walls between them came down. The contract they had once signed, once so carefully crafted to maintain appearances, no longer held any power over them. They didn't know what the future would hold, but they knew one thing for sure. They had crossed a line, and neither of them was willing to go back. The kiss they shared that night wasn't just about desire, or even about the emotions that had been building between them. It was about something more, a promise that whatever happened next, they would face it together. The following weeks were filled with a mix of uncertainty and excitement. Ethan and Sophia's relationship, once built on a contract, was now grounded in something real. They had finally let go of the facade they had so carefully crafted for the world, and although it felt liberating, it was also terrifying. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for the first time, they were facing it together. The public, of course, had a field day with the shift in their relationship. The media began to speculate more openly, and rumors of their genuine connection spread like wildfire. But this time, it didn't matter to either of them. They weren't playing a part anymore. They were learning to trust each other in ways they hadn't anticipated. For Ethan, it was a revelation. He had spent his life building walls around himself, walls that kept others out, walls that allowed him to maintain control. But with Sophia, those walls had come down. She had shown him a side of himself he hadn't known existed, a side that wasn't defined by business or success. She had made him feel seen, heard, and wanted, not for his money or his empire, but for who he truly was. And it made him realize that he had been missing out on something far more valuable than power or wealth. Sophia, too, was beginning to see the world differently. She had come into this relationship with a clear goal, advancing her career, writing a story, but she had left all that behind. She had fallen for Ethan, and it wasn't something she had planned. But now, as they navigated this new phase of their relationship, she knew one thing for sure: it wasn't just about career or ambition anymore. It was about building something real, something she could hold on to. Despite the challenges that came with their newfound relationship, they were both determined to make it work. Ethan had learned to open up, to trust that his feelings could be as powerful as his business instincts, and Sophia had found a balance between her career and her heart. They didn't know what the future would bring, but they were no longer afraid of facing it together. One evening, several months after they had started this journey, Ethan took Sophia to the same charity gala they had attended in the beginning, the one where their fake relationship had started. This time, however, things were different. As they walked down the red carpet, hand in hand, there was no pretending, no cameras to hide behind. It was just them. And for the first time, as they posed for the photographers, Ethan felt a sense of peace. He wasn't hiding behind a mask anymore. The world could see him for who he really was, the man who had found love, not in a business contract, but in the most unexpected place. As the night wore on, Ethan pulled Sophia aside, away from the crowd, into a quiet corner of the venue. "I don't know if I ever told you this," he said, his voice soft. "But when I signed that contract, I had no idea what it would lead to. I thought I was just protecting my image. But then, I met you." He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers, sending a wave of warmth through her. "And now, I realize I've been protecting the wrong things." Sophia looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "I feel the same way," she said softly. This isn't what I expected, but it's everything I ever wanted." They shared a quiet, tender moment, both knowing that whatever came next, they had something real. They were no longer bound by a contract, a business deal, or public expectation. They were free to create their own future, together. The night ended with a sense of fulfillment that neither of them had felt before. They were no longer playing a role, no longer pretending. They were just two people, deeply in love, with a future ahead of them that was theirs to build. No contract, no expectations, just love. And as they left the gala hand in hand, they both knew that this was only the beginning of their story.